My phone buzzed at 11:42 p.m. It was my son. We need space. Don't contact us again. At all. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I did exactly what he asked. By sunrise, his house was no longer his. His bank accounts were frozen. And the life he thought he built? It was never his to begin with. What he didn't know was that I had already seen what he was planning behind my back. The message came at exactly 11:42 p.m. Edward Hale didn't hear it at first. His phone sat face down on a marble kitchen counter, vibrating softly against the stone, an expensive surface in a penthouse that felt far too quiet for a man who had built an empire. He was standing by the window, looking out over Manhattan. 43 floors up, the city didn't sound like noise anymore. It sounded distant, like something that belonged to other people. People who had somewhere to be. People who had someone waiting for them. Edward adjusted the cuff of his shirt, a habit from decades of boardrooms and negotiations, then finally turned back toward the kitchen. The phone buzzed again. He walked over slowly, not rushed, not curious, just aware. Because deep down, he already knew who it was. Jason. His son didn't call anymore. Not really. Messages had replaced conversations. Short, efficient, emotionally empty, just like business emails. Edward picked up the phone and turned it over. One unread message. He stared at the screen for a long second before opening it. Then he read it. Once. Twice. A third time slower. Asterisk, we need space. Please don't reach out anymore. At all. Asterisk. There was no anger in the words. No explanation. No hesitation. Just finality. Edward didn't react right away. No sigh. No shaking hands. No dramatic shift in expression. He simply stood there. Still. The city lights reflected faintly in his eyes as something quiet settled inside him. Not pain exactly, but recognition. Because this wasn't the first time he'd felt it. That distance. That slow, invisible drift that had been happening for years. It hadn't always been like this. There was a time when Jason used to wait by the front door. Edward could still picture it. Small sneakers, untied laces, bouncing with excitement the moment he got home late from work. Dad, did you bring it? It didn't matter what it was. A toy, a story, even just his attention. Back then, Edward was everything. Back then, Jason looked at him like he was the strongest man in the world. But success has a cost no one talks about. Edward didn't inherit his wealth. He built it, deal by deal, risk by risk, year after year. While other men slept, he negotiated. While families ate dinner together, he was closing contracts in glass offices under artificial light. He told himself it was for Jason. Every late night, every missed birthday, every quiet apology that turned into a wire transfer or a new opportunity. He didn't give his son time. He gave him everything else. And Jason accepted it. At first with gratitude, then with expectation, and eventually with entitlement. The shift had been subtle. It started with small things, calls that weren't returned, dinners that got postponed, conversations that felt transactional. Then came Lily, Jason's wife. Polished, elegant, always smiling, but never quite warm. She had a way of speaking to Edward that sounded respectful on the surface, but hollow underneath. Like she was tolerating him. Like he was part of the furniture that came with the life they enjoyed. Edward had noticed. Of course he had. Men like him didn't build fortunes by missing details. But he didn't say anything. Because he told himself it wasn't important. Because he believed, maybe foolishly, that as long as his son was happy, the rest didn't matter. Until his birthday, 70 years old, a milestone most men celebrated surrounded by family. Edward spent it at a long dining table in a private restaurant, watching his son laugh with people who barely knew him, watching Lily check her phone while he spoke, watching himself become invisible. At one point, Jason raised a glass. Edward thought, just for a second, that this was it. The moment. The acknowledgement. But Jason didn't look at him. He looked at his friends. To new beginnings, Jason said with a smile. No mention of the man who gave him everything. No gratitude. Not even eye contact. Edward didn't leave early. He didn't argue. He didn't confront anyone. He simply paid the bill and went home. And now, hours later, he stood in his kitchen, staring at the message that finally said out loud what had been building for years. Don't reach out anymore. Edward exhaled slowly, placing the phone back down on the counter. The silence returned immediately. Heavy, complete. But something inside him had changed. Not broken. Clarified. He walked back to the window, looking out over the city one more time. Then, almost under his breath, he spoke. All right. A small pause. Then a quiet nod. You got it. In that moment, Edward Hale made a decision. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of something far more dangerous. Acceptance. And by morning, everything Jason thought was his would be gone. The next morning, Jason Hale woke up late. Not because he was tired, but because he could. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, stretching across imported marble floors and reflecting off a skyline view most people only saw in movies. For a moment, everything felt normal, comfortable, secure. He rolled over, reaching for his phone with a lazy hand, expecting notifications, messages, emails, confirmations of the life he believed he had earned. Instead, there was silence. No overnight deposits. No client updates. No confirmations. Just one missed call from an unknown number. Jason frowned slightly, sitting up. Beside him, Lily was still asleep, wrapped in silk sheets, her face peaceful in a way that came from never having to worry about consequences. He unlocked his phone again and refreshed his banking app. Loading. Then, error. He blinked. Tried again. Same result. Probably maintenance, he muttered, more to reassure himself than anything else. He swung his legs off the bed and stood, stretching as he walked toward the kitchen. The espresso machine hummed to life with a press of a button, a $6,000 piece of convenience he never thought twice about. Everything in his world worked instantly. Always had. Until now. 10 minutes later, Lily walked in, tying her robe loosely around her waist. You're up early, she said, her voice soft but distracted, already scrolling through her own phone. Jason didn't answer right away. He was staring at his screen. Hey, is your card working? He asked. Lily barely looked up. Of course it is. She tapped her screen, then paused. Her brows pulled together. Wait. Jason looked at her. What? She tried again. Then again. Why is it saying declined? That word landed heavier than it should have. Declined. Jason let out a small laugh. Okay, that's weird. He grabbed his wallet, pulling out one of his credit cards, the black one. The one that never failed. The one that opened doors, skipped lines, erased problems. He walked over to the kitchen terminal and manually entered a small transaction. Processing. Then, declined. The silence that followed was different now. Not calm. Not distant. Tight. Try another one, Lily said quickly. He did. Declined. Another. Declined. The espresso machine beeped softly, waiting. Neither of them moved. Okay, this is just a glitch, Jason said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Lily was already dialing her bank. Jason opened his banking app again, this time forcing himself to stay calm. Login successful. Balance. He froze. The number on the screen didn't make sense. It wasn't low. It was zero. Not reduced. Not limited. Gone. What the hell is this? He whispered. Lily hung up abruptly. They said my account is under review. Temporarily restricted. Jason looked at her sharply. Restricted? For what? They wouldn't say. Something cold began to creep into his chest. Not panic. Not yet. Just pressure. He quickly opened another app. Investment accounts. Frozen. Every single one. He checked notifications. Nothing. No warning. No explanation. Just silence. Then his phone buzzed. Jason grabbed it instantly. Not a bank. Not a company. Not a client. Just a system alert. Ownership status updated. He didn't understand. Until the next notification came in. Vehicle repossession initiated. What? He said out loud. Lily turned. What is it? My car. Before he could finish, they both heard it. A faint sound from outside. Metal. Movement. Jason rushed to the window. Far below, on the street, a tow truck was already lifting his car. Not just any car. His car. The one he posted last week. The one he told everyone he earned. No, no, no. This is insane, he muttered, backing away from the glass. Lily rushed over, looking down. Oh my God. Jason ran a hand through his hair, pacing now. This has to be some kind of mistake. It's not a mistake, Lily snapped, her voice rising. Everything doesn't just shut down at once. He stopped. Because deep down, he already knew. There was only one person who could do this. Only one person who had that level of control. Edward. Jason clenched his jaw. No, he said quickly. No, he wouldn't. But even as he said it, the the memory hit him. The message, "Don't reach out anymore." Lily turned slowly toward him. "What did you say to him?" Jason didn't answer. Because for the first time, he wasn't thinking about what he said. He was realizing what it meant. Across the city, Edward Hale sat at a quiet desk, reviewing documents with calm precision. No anger. No hesitation. Just execution. Accounts closed. Assets reclaimed. Dependencies removed. A lifetime of support, erased in less than 12 hours. Edward signed the final document and set his pen down. Then he looked out the window, just like the night before. Only this time, there was no weight in his eyes. "Space," he said quietly. A small, almost invisible nod followed. "Now you have it." Jason didn't call his father. Not immediately, because that would mean admitting something he wasn't ready to accept yet, that everything in his life had never really belonged to him. Instead, he chose anger. "This is insane," he snapped, pacing across the penthouse like a man trying to outrun reality. "He can't just do this." Lily crossed her arms, her earlier panic already shifting into something sharper. "Oh, he can," she said. "The question is, why now?" Jason stopped, because deep down, he already knew the answer. The birthday, the look on Edward's face, the silence, and then, that message. "He's being dramatic," Jason muttered, grabbing his phone again. "This is just control. He wants us to crawl back." Lily tilted her head slightly. "So don't." Jason looked at her. "What?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was proposing something logical, reasonable. "Think about it. This is emotional manipulation. He cuts you off, waits for you to panic, then you go running back, apologizing, begging." She shook her head. "That's exactly what he wants." Jason hesitated, because part of him, just a small part, felt the pull of that truth. Not her version of it. The real one. The one where maybe, just maybe, he had gone too far. But pride is louder than doubt. And pride doesn't let you step backward. "He's not getting that," Jason said firmly. "I don't need him." Lily smiled faintly. "Exactly." There was a pause. Then she added, "We just need a smarter approach." Jason frowned. "What do you mean?" Lily didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the kitchen island, leaning against it casually like this was just another conversation. "Your father isn't just rich," she said. "He's old." Jason blinked. "Okay. And powerful. Which means everything he has is tied to legal structures, accounts, trusts, authority." She looked at him directly now. "But all of that depends on one thing." Jason felt something shift. "What?" "Competency." The word hung in the air. Heavy. Calculated. Jason stared at her. "What are you saying?" Lily's expression didn't change. "I'm saying, if someone questions whether he's mentally fit to manage his assets." She let the sentence trail off, but the meaning was already clear. Jason took a step back. That's insane." "Is it?" she replied calmly. "He just wiped out your entire financial life overnight. No warning. No discussion. That's not exactly stable behavior." He's not crazy," Jason said, though his voice had lost some of its edge. Lily shrugged slightly. "Maybe not. But can you prove it?" Silence. Jason ran a hand through his hair again, this time slower, more uncertain. "You're talking about legal action," he said. "I'm talking about protecting what's yours." "Nothing is mine," Jason shot back, gesturing toward his phone. "That's the problem." Lily stepped closer. "No," she said quietly. "That's what he wants you to believe." Jason looked at her, really looked this time, and saw it. Not fear, not panic, but strategy. "You think we can take control?" he said slowly. "I think," Lily replied, "that if the court believes he's unfit, everything gets reassigned." "To me." She didn't smile, but she didn't deny it either. Jason turned away, walking back toward the window. The street below was empty now. His car was gone, just like everything else. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control, about power, about proving something, to his father, to himself. "He started this," Jason said under his breath. Lily didn't respond, because she knew. That was all it took. Jason picked up his phone again, not to call Edward, but to scroll. Contacts, names, connections. Then he stopped on one. Dr. Alan Mercer. A psychiatrist. Private, discreet, and, more importantly, flexible. Jason stared at the name for a moment, his thumb hovering. His mind racing. This was a line. A clear one. Once crossed. There was no going back. But then he thought about the accounts. The humiliation. The feeling of being cut off like he meant nothing. And something inside him hardened. He wants space, Jason muttered, his thumb pressed down. Call. Across the city, Edward Hale sat in silence once again. But this time, he wasn't watching the skyline. He was reviewing a file. A thin one. Simple. Labeled with one name. Jason Hale. Inside were notes. Observations. Patterns. Edward flipped a page slowly. Then stopped. Because his phone lit up. A notification. Not from Jason. But from someone else. Contact initiated. Dr. Alan Mercer. Edward didn't react. Didn't frown. Didn't sigh. He simply closed the folder. And for the first time, a faint, almost invisible expression crossed his face. Not anger. Not disappointment. Expectation. So that's the path you chose, he said quietly. Then he reached for his own phone. Because unlike his son, Edward Hale never made a move. Without already being 10 steps ahead. Jason didn't notice how quiet the penthouse had become. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind that feels like something has been removed, something essential. No notifications. No incoming transfers. No subtle background hum of a life funded by invisible systems working in his favor. Just silence. By noon, reality had fully settled in. And it wasn't temporary. Jason sat at the kitchen island, laptop open, refreshing the same screens over and over again like repetition might change the outcome. It didn't. Every account still read the same. Restricted. Frozen. Inaccessible. Asterisk asterisk. Lily stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the city below, but she wasn't really looking at it. She was thinking. Calculating. This isn't just money, she said finally. Jason didn't look up. No kidding. It's control, she continued. Your father didn't just cut you off. He erased your access to everything. Jason shut the laptop harder than necessary. I get it. Do you? Lily turned to face him. Because if you did, you'd understand this isn't something you wait out. Jason leaned back in his chair, frustration building. So what do you want me to do? Call him and beg. Yes, she said. He froze. But not like that, she added calmly. Jason narrowed his eyes. Then what? Lily walked over slowly, placing both hands on the table. You don't ask for anything, she said. You position yourself. Position myself how? She held his gaze. As the one who should be in control. Jason exhaled sharply. We already talked about this. The competency angle, it's risky. Everything is risky when you've already lost, Lily replied. That landed. Because for the first time, Jason had nothing to push back with. No money. No leverage. No proof that he was independent. Just dependence. We're not just making an accusation, Lily continued. We're creating a narrative. Jason frowned. That sounds worse. It's smarter, she corrected. Your father isolates himself. He makes extreme financial decisions overnight. He cuts off his own son without explanation. She paused. Tell me that doesn't sound unstable. Jason didn't answer. Because framed like that, it almost did. And Dr. Mercer? Lily asked. Jason nodded slowly. He said he's willing to evaluate. Off the record at first. Good, she said. That's all we need. Jason stood up, pacing again, but slower this time. More focused. Less emotional. If we do this, he said, there's no going back. Lily didn't hesitate. Then don't go back. Silence filled the space between them. Not empty. Decisive. Jason stopped pacing. Looked at his reflection in the glass. For a brief moment. He didn't recognize the person staring back. Then he spoke. All right. That was it. No speech. No dramatic shift. Just a single word that sealed everything. Good, Lily said quietly. She reached for her phone. Then we moved fast. Within hours, things began to unfold. Calls were made. Documents requested. Appointments scheduled under careful wording. Not accusations yet. Just concerns. Concern for Edward Hale's well-being. Concern for sudden behavioral changes. Concern for possible cognitive decline. Each word carefully chosen. Each step legally structured. Jason signed the first preliminary document just after 3 p.m. His hand hesitated for less than a second. Then the pen moved. And just like that, the line was crossed. Across the city, Edward sat in a quiet office, far removed from the chaos he had already set in motion. No screens flashing, no raised voices, just calm. A single folder lay open in front of him. Inside, copies of communications, timestamps, financial logs, and now, new entries. He read them without emotion. Every call, every inquiry, every move Jason and Lily had made. Documented. Expected. Edward leaned back slightly in his chair. Not surprised. Not even disappointed. Just confirmed. They didn't hesitate, he murmured. A man standing nearby, his attorney, watched him carefully. Do you want to intervene? The attorney asked. Edward shook his head. No. A pause. Let them continue. The attorney frowned slightly. They're building a case against you. Edward closed the folder gently. I know. Then why? Because, Edward said calmly, the more they build. He looked up, and the further they go. His voice lowered slightly. The harder they fall. Silence filled the room. Then Edward stood, adjusting his jacket with the same precision he always had. Prepare everything, he said. But don't stop them. The attorney hesitated, then nodded. Because men like Edward Hale didn't react to attacks. They allowed them. And somewhere across the city, Jason believed he was finally taking control. But in reality, he had just stepped onto a path that had already been built for him. And at the end of it, there would be no way back. By the second day, the panic was gone. Not because things had improved, but because Jason had convinced himself they would. He sat across from Dr. Alan Mercer in a quiet, dimly lit office that smelled faintly of leather and antiseptic. The kind of place designed to feel safe, but also private enough to keep secrets. Mercer leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, studying Jason with clinical detachment. You're saying your father cut off all financial access overnight, he said. Yes, Jason replied quickly. No warning. No conversation. Just gone. Mercer nodded slowly. And prior to this, had he shown any signs of instability? Jason hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. But Lily answered for him. He's been increasingly withdrawn, she said smoothly. Paranoid, even. He doesn't trust anyone anymore. Mercer's eyes shifted toward her briefly. And you are his daughter-in-law. Mercer made a note, not because he believed them, but because he understood the direction this was going. Extreme financial decisions can sometimes be linked to cognitive decline, Mercer said carefully. But that alone isn't enough to establish incompetence. Jason leaned forward. What is enough? Mercer met his eyes. Documentation, patterns, testimony, and evaluation. Lily spoke again, her tone softer now. And if someone were concerned enough to request that evaluation? Mercer paused, then gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. It would depend on how that concern is presented. Jason understood. This wasn't about truth. It was about framing. We can present it, Lily said. Properly. Mercer studied them both for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. I don't make false diagnoses, he said. Jason nodded quickly. Of course. But, Mercer continued, I do assess based on available information. Another pause. And sometimes, he added, information can be interpreted. That was all they needed. Jason left the office feeling something he hadn't felt in 2 days. Control. Not real control, but the illusion of it. And right now, that was enough. He's on board, Jason said as they stepped out onto the street. Lily adjusted her sunglasses, hiding the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. Good. Jason exhaled, looking up at the skyline. This is going to work. Lily didn't answer immediately, because she wasn't thinking about if it would work. She was thinking about how far they could take it. Once the evaluation is in motion, she said finally, we push for temporary oversight. Jason glanced at her. Meaning, she said calmly. Someone has to manage his assets while his condition is under review. Jason stopped walking. Me? Lily turned to him. Who else? There it was. The real objective. Not just restoring what they lost. Taking everything. Jason felt a surge of adrenaline. Not fear. Not doubt. Something else. Something sharper. Validation. Because if this worked, it wouldn't just prove his father wrong. It would prove that he never needed him to begin with. All right, Jason said. Let's do it. Across the city, Edward Hale sat at a long table, untouched coffee growing cold beside him. He wasn't working. He wasn't reading. He was listening, not to voices, but to updates. A man across from him, another advisor this time, closed a tablet slowly. They've initiated preliminary steps, he said. Medical angle. Legal framing. It's moving quickly. Edward nodded once. Of course it is. No surprise. No reaction. They're requesting an evaluation, the advisor continued, and preparing to argue for temporary control of your assets. A pause. Through your son. Edward's fingers tapped lightly against the table. Not nervous, just thoughtful. Do they believe it? He asked. The advisor hesitated. I believe they believe it enough. Edward let out a quiet breath. That's enough. He stood slowly, walking toward the window. The same view, the same city, but everything felt different now. Not because of what Jason was doing, but because of what Jason had become. He didn't even try to understand, Edward said quietly. The advisor didn't respond. Because there was nothing to say. Edward turned slightly, his expression unreadable. Prepare the next phase, he said. The advisor frowned. Are you sure? Once we move forward, there's no reversal, Edward finished calmly. A beat. I know. He looked back out at the skyline. They've already crossed that line. And somewhere across the city, Jason was celebrating a plan he believed would restore everything. But in reality, he had just tightened the trap around himself. And this time, there would be no one left to blame. By the end of the week, Jason no longer felt like he was reacting. He felt like he was winning. The paperwork was moving faster than expected. Too fast, if anyone had stopped to question it. But no one did. Because everything was structured carefully, legally, technically, plausibly. Jason sat in a private conference room, staring at a stack of documents spread across the table. Legal notices, medical concerns, requests for evaluation. Each page carried the same quiet implication. Edward Hale may no longer be fit to manage his own affairs. Jason leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This is actually happening, he said. Across from him, Lily didn't look surprised. It was always going to happen, she replied. Jason shook his head slightly, almost in disbelief. Just a few days ago, I had nothing. Lily tilted her head. You still don't. He looked at her. This, she said, tapping the documents lightly, is just the process of getting it back. Jason nodded slowly. Right, getting it back. That's how he justified it. Not stealing, not taking, just reclaiming what should have been his all along. And Mercer? Jason asked. Lily glanced at her phone. He's submitted preliminary observations. Nothing official yet, but enough to raise concern. Jason leaned forward. Concern is enough? For now, she said. It opens the door. Jason's fingers tapped lightly against the table. Once the court approves the evaluation, we push for temporary conservatorship, Lily finished. Jason felt a small rush at that word. Conservatorship. It sounded official, powerful, final. And once that's in place, he asked. Lily met his eyes. You control everything. Silence. Jason let that sink in. Every account, every asset, every decision. His father's empire, handed to him. Not as a gift, but as a judgment. For a brief moment, something flickered inside him. A thought, a question. Would Dad ever forgive this? But it disappeared just as quickly as it came. Because forgiveness didn't matter. Control did. Then we don't stop, Jason said firmly. Lily smiled faintly. Now you're thinking clearly. Across the city, Edward Hale received the official notice just before sunset. He didn't open it right away. He already knew what it contained. Instead, he poured himself a glass of water. Not whiskey, not wine, just water. Calm, clear, unshaken. Then he sat down and opened the envelope. The words were exactly what he expected. Formal concern regarding mental competency. Request for evaluation. Potential reassignment of financial authority. Edward read every line slowly. Not because he needed to, but because details mattered. They always had. When he finished, he placed the paper down neatly. Aligned. Precise. No crumpling. No anger. Just acknowledgement. They committed to it, he said quietly. His attorney stood nearby, watching carefully. Yes, he replied. They've moved beyond informal positioning. This is official now. Edward nodded once. Good. The attorney frowned slightly. Good. Edward looked up. It means they won't stop halfway. A pause. They'll go all the way. The attorney studied him. And that's what you want. Edward didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood and walked toward the window again. The same place. The same view. But something had shifted. Not outside. Inside. I gave him everything, Edward said quietly. No bitterness. Just truth. And he still chose this. The attorney remained silent. Edward continued. That means this was never about money. A longer pause. It was about who he thinks he is without me. He turned slightly. And now we'll find out. Back in the conference room, Jason signed another document. Then another. Each signature felt easier than the last. The hesitation was gone, replaced by momentum. By the time he stood up, the decision was no longer a question. It was a path. And he was already too far down it to turn around. You did the right thing, Lily said as they walked out. Jason nodded. I know. But his voice didn't carry the same certainty anymore. Because deep down, something felt off. Not wrong. Just unfinished. Like a door that had been closed too quickly. But instead of opening it, he kept walking. And behind that closed door, Edward Hale was preparing something far more dangerous than anger. Proof. Because once the truth came out, it wouldn't just destroy the case. It would destroy everything Jason believed about himself. And this time, there would be no coming back from it. Edward Hale didn't rush. He never had. Not when he built his fortune. Not when competitors tried to outmaneuver him. And certainly not now, when his own son was trying to take everything from him. The difference was, this time, it wasn't business. Edward stood in a quiet, secure office, far from the glass towers Jason liked to photograph. No skyline views. No polished marble. Just a large wooden desk, a few chairs, and a wall lined with locked filing cabinets. Real work didn't need to look impressive. It needed to be effective. Everything is ready, his attorney said, placing a thick folder on the desk. Edward didn't touch it yet. How far along are they? He asked. They've formally submitted the competency request, the attorney replied. Medical evaluation is pending, but they're pushing aggressively for temporary control. Edward nodded once. Good. The attorney hesitated. You keep saying that. Edward finally looked at him. Because the more they push, he said calmly, the more they expose themselves. A quiet pause followed. Then Edward reached for the folder. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, not just documents, evidence. He opened it slowly. Page 1. Recorded phone transcripts. Jason's voice. Clear. Unfiltered. Asterisk. We just need to frame it right. Make it look like he's unstable. Asterisk. Edward didn't react. He simply turned the page. Page 2. Banking activity logs. Payments. Transfers. Not from Edward, but from Jason. Money sent to Dr. Alan Mercer. Unusual amounts. Unusual timing. Edward flipped again. Page 3. Private messages. Between Jason and Lily. Asterisk. Once we get control, we liquidate fast. Asterisk. Asterisk. He won't even know what hit him. Asterisk. The word sat there. Cold. Final. Edward closed the folder halfway. Not because he couldn't keep reading, but because he didn't need to. He already understood everything. They didn't just make a mistake, the attorney said carefully. Edward looked up. No, he replied. They made a decision. Across the city, Jason sat with Lily in another meeting, this time with a legal consultant. Once the evaluation is approved, the consultant explained, we'll request temporary conservatorship. It's not permanent, but it gives you immediate control. Jason nodded. And after that, if the court agrees your father is unfit, the consultant continued, control can be extended, potentially indefinitely. Lily leaned forward slightly. And his assets? The consultant gave a small, professional smile. Would be managed by you. Jason felt it again. That surge. That certainty. Everything was falling into place. How soon? He asked. Sooner than you think, the consultant replied. Jason leaned back, exhaling slowly. For the first time since everything collapsed, he felt like he was standing on solid ground again. Back in the quiet office, Edward stood by the window. The folder was now closed, set aside. His attorney watched him carefully. You have enough to stop this right now, he said. We can file counterclaims. Shut everything down before it reaches court. Edward didn't turn. No. The attorney frowned. No. Edward's voice remained calm. If I stop it now. A pause. He learns nothing. Silence. The attorney understood. But that didn't make it easier. They're committing fraud, he said. Conspiracy. This isn't small. I know, Edward replied. Another pause. And that's exactly why they need to finish it. Jason left the meeting feeling lighter, more confident. They can't stop us now, he said as they stepped outside. Lily smiled faintly. They won't. Jason checked his phone. New notifications. Legal confirmations. Next steps. Everything moving forward. Fast. Too fast. But he didn't question it. Because speed felt like progress. And progress felt like victory. You see, Lily said, he thought cutting us off would break us. Jason nodded. But all he did, he looked up at the skyline again, was force us to take control. Across the city, Edward Hale picked up his phone. He sent a single message. Not to Jason. To someone else. Proceed. That was it. No explanation. No emotion. Just a command. Within minutes, things began to shift. Quietly. Invisibly. Legal systems activated. Authorities notified. Evidence prepared. Not for defense. For exposure. Edward placed his phone down and closed his eyes for a brief moment. Not out of exhaustion, but reflection. Because despite everything, one truth remained. That was still his son. And what was coming next would change his life forever. Edward opened his eyes again. Calm. Certain. You chose this, he said softly. And somewhere across the city, Jason was smiling. Completely unaware that the trap had already been set. And he had just walked straight into it. The hearing was scheduled faster than anyone expected. 3 days. That was all it took for everything to move from quiet strategy to public confrontation. Jason stood outside the courthouse, adjusting his tie for the third time in less than a minute. The building loomed in front of him, stone, cold, uninviting. It didn't feel like a place where people won. It felt like a place where things were decided. Final. You need to relax, Lily said beside him, her voice controlled, steady. Jason exhaled sharply. I am relaxed. You're not, she replied. And if you walk in there like this, they'll see it. Jason clenched his jaw, not out of anger, out of pressure. Because for the first time since this started, this wasn't theory anymore. This was real. Just remember, Lily continued, lowering her voice slightly, we're not attacking him. Jason looked at her. We're helping him. He nodded slowly. Right. That's what this was. Concern. Responsibility. Not betrayal. Let's go, she said. Inside, the courtroom was quieter than Jason expected. No drama. No chaos. Just controlled tension. A judge at the front. Attorneys already seated. A few observers scattered quietly. And then, Jason saw him. Edward Hale. Sitting calmly at the opposite side of the room. No sign of stress. No visible reaction. No anger. Just stillness. Jason felt something tighten in his chest. Because that calm didn't look like weakness. It looked like certainty. Stay focused, Lily whispered. Jason nodded and walked forward. The proceedings began quickly. Formal. Structured. Jason's attorney stood first. Your Honor, he began. We are here today out of concern, not conflict. Jason kept his expression neutral. Controlled. As the son of Mr. Edward Hale, the attorney continued, my client has observed a series of increasingly erratic decisions, financial and behavioral, that raise serious questions regarding his father's mental fitness. Jason felt his pulse in his throat, but he didn't move. This includes the sudden liquidation and restriction of all financial support systems without explanation, isolation from family, and patterns consistent with cognitive decline. Every word landed exactly as planned. Careful, measured, believable. Given the scale of Mr. Hale's assets, the attorney continued, we are requesting a formal evaluation and temporary reassignment of financial oversight to ensure those assets are protected. A pause. Specifically, to his son, Jason Hale. Silence followed. The judge looked down at the documents. Then, Mr. Hale, she said, turning slightly, how do you respond to these concerns? Every eye in the room shifted. Edward stood slowly. No rush. No hesitation. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I understand my son's concern." Jason blinked. That wasn't what he expected. "I have made decisions recently," Edward continued, "that may appear sudden from the outside." He paused. But they were neither irrational nor uninformed. Jason's fingers tightened slightly at his side. Edward turned his head just enough. Not fully, but enough to acknowledge him. And they were necessary. Silence. The judge studied him carefully. "Are you willing to undergo evaluation?" she asked. A simple question. Jason felt a flicker of relief. Because this was it. This was the step that opened everything. Edward didn't answer immediately. He let the silence sit. Then, "Yes." Jason exhaled quietly. Of course. There was no way around it. And once the evaluation began, everything else would follow. "However," Edward added calmly, "I would also like to submit additional materials for the court's consideration." Jason's head turned slightly. "That wasn't part of the plan." The judge nodded. "You may." Edward's attorney stood, placing a folder on the table. Thicker than expected. Jason felt something shift again. That same feeling. Not fear, but something close to it. "What is this?" his attorney whispered. Jason didn't answer. Because he didn't know. The judge opened the folder slowly. The room grew quieter. Page 1. Her expression didn't change. Page 2. A slight pause. Page 3. Her eyes lifted. Not at Edward. At Jason. And for the first time, Jason felt it. Not pressure. Not doubt. Something colder. Realization. "What exactly am I looking at here?" the judge asked. Edward didn't move. But his voice came steady. "Evidence," he said. "A beat. Of intent." Jason's stomach dropped. Because suddenly, this didn't feel like a hearing anymore. It felt like something else. Something far more dangerous. And for the first time since this all began, Jason realized he might not be the one in control. The courtroom didn't erupt. There was no shouting, no dramatic gasps, just a shift. A subtle, almost invisible shift in the air, as if everyone in the room suddenly understood something Jason didn't. "Mr. Hale," the judge said slowly, her eyes still on the documents, "are you alleging that this request was made in bad faith?" Edward didn't answer immediately. He didn't need to. Because his attorney stepped forward. "Your Honor," he said, calm and precise, "we are not alleging. We are demonstrating." He gestured lightly toward the folder. Contained in those documents are recorded communications, financial transactions, and written correspondence that establish a coordinated effort to falsely declare Mr. Hale mentally incompetent for the purpose of gaining control over his assets. The words landed like a quiet explosion. Jason felt his throat tighten. "That's not," he started. "Sit," his attorney whispered sharply. Jason stopped. Because suddenly, everything felt fragile. The judge turned another page. Then another. "Audio transcripts," she murmured. Her eyes moved slightly as she read. Jason knew. Before she even looked up, he knew exactly which one. Asterisk. "We just need to frame it right. Make it look like he's unstable." Asterisk. His own voice. Clear. Undeniable. Jason's heart began to pound. "That could be taken out of context," his attorney said quickly. "Then provide the context," the judge replied without looking up. Silence. Because there was no better version of that sentence. Only worse ones. She turned another page. "Financial transfers to Dr. Alan Mercer," she continued. "Multiple payments, outside standard consultation fees." Jason's eyes flicked toward Lily. For the first time, she didn't look composed. Just still. Calculating. But even she didn't speak. "Would you like to explain these transactions?" the judge asked. Jason's attorney stepped in again. "Your Honor, private medical consultations do not typically require undisclosed financial incentives," she interrupted. The room grew colder. Because now, this wasn't about concern. This was about intent. And intent was much harder to defend. Edward still hadn't moved. He stood exactly where he had been. Calm. Unshaken. Watching. Not like a man under attack, but like a man watching something inevitable unfold. The judge closed the folder halfway. Mr. Hale, she said, looking directly at Jason now, did you attempt to influence a medical professional in order to support this claim? Jason opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because there were only two answers, and both destroyed him. No, his attorney said firmly. My client. I asked him, the judge said. Silence. Jason swallowed. His voice felt stuck somewhere between his chest and his throat. We were just trying to. To what? The judge pressed. Jason's mind raced. To fix it. To control it. To win. But none of those sounded right anymore. Protect the assets, he said finally. The moment the words left his mouth, he knew. That was the wrong answer. Because the judge leaned back slightly. Protect them from who? She asked. Jason didn't respond. Because suddenly, that question had no safe answer. Across the room, Edward spoke for the first time since submitting the evidence. From me, apparently. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Jason looked at him. Really looked this time. And what he saw wasn't anger. Not disappointment. Something worse. Clarity. You didn't even ask me why, Edward said quietly. The room stayed silent. You didn't try to understand. A small pause. You went straight to control. Jason's chest tightened. Because there was no defense for that. Not anymore. The judge closed the folder completely now. I am suspending this request immediately, she said. Jason's attorney leaned forward. Your Honor. And I am referring this matter for further investigation. That word hit harder than anything else. Investigation. Because this wasn't just over. It was beginning again. From a completely different direction. One Jason wasn't prepared for. Based on the materials presented, the judge continued. There is sufficient cause to examine potential fraud, coercion, and conspiracy. Jason felt the ground shift beneath him. Not metaphorically. Physically. Like everything he had been standing on was suddenly gone. He glanced at Lily again. This time, she looked away. Just slightly. But it was enough. Because in that small moment, Jason realized something terrifying. He wasn't just losing control. He had never had it. Edward adjusted his jacket calmly. No victory. No satisfaction. Just finality. Because this wasn't revenge. This was consequence. And for the first time, Jason Hale was about to learn what that really meant. Jason didn't leave the courtroom right away. He couldn't. Everything had ended, but nothing felt finished. People were already moving. Attorneys packing files. Quiet conversations beginning in low tones. The system shifting into its next phase. One Jason was no longer part of. He stood there, frozen, like his body hadn't caught up to what just happened. Jason. His attorney's voice cut through the fog. We need to go? Now. Jason blinked. Go where? The attorney didn't answer directly. Instead, he leaned in closer. You're about to be questioned. This is no longer civil. That word again. Not family. Not dispute. Something else. Jason swallowed. His mouth felt dry. This can't be criminal, he said, almost to himself. His attorney didn't argue. Which told him everything. Let's move, the attorney said. Jason finally stepped forward. One foot, then another. But as he passed the center of the courtroom, he stopped. Because Edward was still there. Standing. Calm. Watching. For a second. Just a second. Their eyes met. Jason expected anger. Maybe even satisfaction. But there was neither. Just distance. The same distance that had been in that message. Don't reach out anymore. Except now, Jason understood something he hadn't before. That message hadn't been rejection. It had been a boundary. And he had crossed it. Completely. Jason opened his mouth. He didn't even know what he was going to say. But it didn't matter. Because Edward spoke first. Don't. One word. Quiet. But final. Jason stopped. Because there was nothing left to say. Outside the courthouse, the world hadn't changed. Cars still moved. People still walked. The city didn't care what had just happened inside that building. But Jason did. Every step felt heavier now. Not physically. Mentally. Like something inside him had collapsed, and he was still trying to stand on it. What happens now, he asked. His attorney didn't soften the answer. They'll investigate. Jason shook his head. No. I mean, what happens to me? A pause. That depends on what they find, the attorney said. Jason let out a dry laugh. They already found it. Across the street, Lily stood by the curb. Not next to him. Not even close. Just there. Waiting. Jason walked toward her. Say something, he said. Lily looked at him. For the first time, she didn't look composed. But she didn't look broken either. She looked detached. This isn't over, she said. Jason stared at her. Are you serious? We adjust, she continued. That's what people like your father do. We adapt. Jason let out a sharp breath. No, he said. That's what he does. A pause. And we just try to play his game. Lily didn't respond. Because deep down, she knew he was right. That night, Jason sat alone. No penthouse. No city view. Just a small, temporary apartment his attorney had arranged. Bare walls. Cheap furniture. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. The kind that forces you to think. Jason stared at his phone. No messages. No updates. Just the reflection of his own face on the dark screen. He barely recognized it. Tired. Tense. Smaller. He leaned back slowly, closing his eyes. And for the first time since all of this began, he didn't feel angry. He didn't feel defensive. He didn't even feel determined. He felt lost. Across the city, Edward Hale sat in a quiet room. No files. No advisors. Just him. Alone. He poured a glass of water and sat down. For a long moment, he didn't move. Because despite everything, there was no victory in what had happened. Only confirmation. He had been right. And somehow, that was the worst part. He looked down at his hands. Steady. Unchanged. But everything else had. He made his choice, Edward said quietly. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. Just truth. Then he stood. Walked to the window one last time. And this time, he didn't stay long. Because there was nothing left to watch. Only something left to decide. And whatever came next would not include looking back. The investigation moved faster than Jason expected. Not because the system was rushing, but because everything was already there. The evidence didn't need to be found. It just needed to be reviewed. Within days, formal notices were issued. Requests for statements. Financial audits. Communication records pulled and verified. Jason sat across from two federal investigators in a plain, windowless room that felt nothing like the life he used to live. No glass walls. No skyline. No illusion of control. Just questions. Mr. Hale, one of them said, flipping through a file, we're going to ask you a series of questions regarding your interactions with Dr. Alan Mercer and your recent legal filings. Jason nodded slowly. Before we begin, the other added, you should understand that full cooperation will be taken into account. Taken into account. Not forgiveness. Not protection. Just consideration. Jason swallowed. Okay. The first question came simply. Did you attempt to influence a medical professional to support a claim of incompetency against your father? Jason stared at the table. A few days ago, he would have denied it instantly, confidently. Now, he hesitated. Because denial didn't erase evidence. And for the first time, he understood the difference between thinking you're in control and actually being accountable. Yes, he said quietly. The word felt heavier than anything he had said before. The investigator nodded once. No reaction. No judgment. Just documentation. Were you aware that this could be considered fraudulent misrepresentation? Jason closed his eyes briefly. I didn't think it would go this far. That wasn't the question, the investigator replied. Jason opened his eyes. Yes. Across town, Lily sat in a different room. Different questions. Same silence between them. But unlike Jason, she didn't hesitate as long. Not because she felt less pressure, but because she had already begun separating herself from it. From him. From everything. We acted on concern, she said carefully. The investigator didn't look convinced. Concern doesn't typically involve undisclosed payments and coordinated narratives, he replied. Lily didn't respond. Because even she knew, that line didn't hold anymore. The charges came quietly. No dramatic announcement. No flashing headlines. Just official documents. Fraud. Attempted coercion. conspiracy to unlawfully obtain financial control. Jason read the words over and over again, each time hoping they would change. They didn't. He sat alone again that night. Same small apartment, same silence. But this time, it felt different. He wasn't just lost anymore. He was facing something real. Consequences. Not from his father. From the world. And for the first time, there was no one to blame. Not Lily. Not the system. Not even Edward. Just himself. Jason leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. And slowly, the truth settled in. Not all at once. But enough. I did this, he said under his breath. No anger. No excuses. Just acknowledgement. Across the ocean, Edward Hale stood on a quiet hillside in Tuscany. No city. No noise. Just open land. Rows of vines stretching into the distance. Warm sunlight. Simple. Real. A small estate sat behind him. Nothing extravagant. Nothing that needed to impress anyone. For the first time in decades, Edward wasn't managing anything. He wasn't building. He wasn't defending. He was done. A man approached him slowly, an advisor who had followed him here. Everything has been finalized, the man said. The majority of your assets have been transferred to the foundation. Edward nodded. Education programs, trade schools, community housing, places where effort mattered, where value wasn't inherited, but built. And your son? The advisor asked carefully. A pause. Edward looked out over the vineyard. I made sure he has what he needs, he said. Not wealth. Not power. Something else. A lesson. Whether Jason learned it, that part wasn't his anymore. Edward took a slow breath. The air felt different here. Cleaner. For the first time, there was no weight on his shoulders. No expectations. Just peace. And as the sun dipped lower over the hills, Edward Hale turned away from everything he used to be and walked toward something he had never truly had before. A life that finally belonged to him. Jason didn't go to prison immediately. That's not how it works. There were hearings, negotiations, months of slow, grinding reality where every decision he had made was dissected, documented, and turned into something permanent. But the outcome was inevitable. The evidence was too clear, the intent too obvious. And in the end, Jason Hale stood in a courtroom again. Only this time, he wasn't the one making requests. He was the one being judged. Given the nature of the offense, the judge said, her voice steady, and the demonstrated intent to manipulate legal and medical systems for personal gain. Jason stared straight ahead. This court finds sufficient grounds for federal charges. The words echoed. Not loud, but final. The defendant is hereby sentenced. Jason didn't hear the rest. Not clearly. Because in that moment, everything he had built in his mind collapsed completely. Not the money, not the lifestyle, the illusion, the belief that he was in control, that he was smarter, that he could outplay the man who had built everything he stood on. Gone. Months later, the world had already moved on. No headlines, no attention, just another case closed. But for Jason, time didn't move the same way anymore. It slowed. Each day measured not in opportunities, but in consequences. Cold mornings, structured routines, silence that wasn't peaceful, but earned. At first, he was angry. At the system, at Lily, at his father. But anger needs somewhere to go. And eventually, there was nowhere left to send it. So it turned inward. And that's when the real change began. Not dramatic, not immediate, but real. Jason started working, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. Manual tasks, simple routines, things he used to look down on. And slowly, something shifted. For the first time in his life, he understood what effort actually felt like. Not inherited, not given, earned. And with that, came something unfamiliar. Respect. Not from others. From himself. Lily never visited. Not once. She moved on quickly, found a new life, a new version of security. Because for her, this was never about family. Only advantage. And once Jason lost that, so did she. Years passed. Not quickly, but steadily. And one day, Jason was released. No cameras, no one waiting. Just a quiet gate opening, and a world that didn't know him anymore. He stood there for a moment. No suit, no watch, no illusion. Just himself. And for the first time, that was enough. Across the ocean, in a quiet vineyard in Tuscany, Edward Hale moved through rows of vines under the morning sun. No rush, no pressure, just routine, real work, the kind that didn't require strategy, only presence. A worker approached him with a small envelope. No return address, the man said. Edward took it. He didn't open it right away. He already knew. Some things you don't need to read to understand. Still, he unfolded the paper inside. The handwriting was different than he remembered. Less sharp, less certain. But the message was clear. I was wrong. Not about the money. About everything else. I thought I was building my life. I was just spending yours. You gave me everything, and I mistook it for something I deserved. I don't expect anything from you. Not forgiveness. Not a response. I just needed you to know. I finally understand. Edward stood there for a long time. Not reacting. Not moving. Just holding the paper. The wind moved softly through the vineyard. Quiet. Peaceful. He folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and slipped it into his pocket. No reply. Because some words don't need answers. They just need to be said. Edward looked out over the land one more time, then continued walking. Not away from his past, but no longer carrying it. And somewhere far away, Jason Hale stood at the beginning of a life he finally had to build on his own. No shortcuts, no safety nets, just choices. Real ones. And for the first time, he understood their weight. Because sometimes, the greatest thing a father can give his child is nothing at all, so they can finally learn what everything is worth.